Hi, this is Erica Marilyn. I'm the founder of Perfect Legal Video. I'm very excited to bring to you another SVL Insights episode. Today, we are going to be talking about final judgments. And here to explain everything under the sun about final judgments is Attorney Jim Sorenson. He's one of the founders of the Sorenson Van Leuven law firm out of Tallahassee, Florida, and they work with credit unions in both Georgia and Florida states. Welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Erica. I'm glad to be here. Good to see you today.
Thank you so much. Well, let's start off with what we typically talk about, which is, the definition of what we're talking about. So this is our What Is series. And, let's talk about the definition of the final judgment.
Yeah, so a final judgment is a court order that resolves a pending lawsuit. And in most cases, the final judgment determines the liability of one party to another party and determines the damages or money that is owed to that party that was damaged. So, for example, I borrow money from you and I fail to pay it back to you, and you sue me in a court of law. At the end of that lawsuit, there would be a judgment entered in your favor, finding that I borrowed the money, I owe you the money, and I now owe you a set amount of money. So it would be, whatever you proved as your damages, whatever you proved I failed to pay you back. So in a very simple term, that is, what a judgment is, and that's an example of a judgment.
Okay, I mean, that's a really good definition. Now, if there is a judgment, is it self-executing? Meaning, like, if for some reason, I have the judgment against you, do you now have to pay me, or do I have to hire a bunch of people to come to your door?
Well, that's a good question. And this is a question I get a lot. I get it not only in the context of my credit union clients, but I get it in context of everyday life. People know I'm a lawyer and they say, oh, I got this judgment. And how do I get my money, or when do I get my money? And, I always say it doesn't work that way. A judgment is simply the court determination that someone owes somebody money, someone owes you money. And while it establishes that the debt is owed and there are no defenses, it does not automatically result in payment of the debt. The judgment itself does not command the judgment debtor to pay the judgment creditor for the money owed. It's simply an order recognizing that the debt is owed and that there are no defenses to that debt. So nothing happens automatically. The holder of the judgment must actually pursue remedies available to them under the law in order to collect the money that the judgment says they are owed.
That's really interesting because I once won in court. I represented myself. I am not an attorney, against a tenant of mine. And I won, and then she declared bankruptcy and I never got my money. And so at another time, I also won in court representing myself. I guess I should have gone to law school. And the woman gave me a different types of furniture than I had actually bought from her. And, it was like this whole thing with a commercial space and furniture I was buying from this woman that never paid up. But, so I know that in my case, the court did not help me, but I don't know if that's because I was representing myself. Does the court typically help people get their judgment?
No, the court does not help. The court, several courts will have a guide. They'll have information on their website. They may have a pamphlet that they give you, or an informational sheet that they would give somebody like you who represented themselves, who holds a judgment. But this general information doesn't walk you through the process. It gives you an overview of, options to pursue. And the reality is that collecting on a judgment is hard work, and it takes some expertise to be effective at it. I've been doing it for 25 years, and there's still cases where it is hard work and it's a complex problem. Now, in some cases, people will pay the judgment. You got a judgment, they don't want it out there against them, and they'll write you a check. But that is more of the exception than the rule. So in most cases, someone's going to have to hire somebody who knows what they're doing, who can help them collect the judgment. And that's what a lot of our clients do. They hire us to help them collect judgments.
Wow. I wish that you were in my state and that I knew you back then. Things could have been a lot easier. Well, I mean, so that's good to know. So what are some of the options to enforce a judgment? I mean, hiring you is one awesome judgment, and that's the only one I would take. But is there anything else that people can do?
Yeah, so the common legal processes that are used are garnishments and levies. Those are probably the two most common. There are other options, including foreclosure of judgment liens, pursuits of fraudulent transfers, imposing charging orders or charging liens on debtors' interest in a business. Those are all the various, legal remedies or legal processes that are out there that would allow somebody to pursue and enforce payment of the judgment.
Now, garnishment, typically strikes fear in the hearts of men and women. When you hear about garnishment, people worry because, well, I'm going to let you tell us why. What exactly is a garnishment?
Yeah, so a garnishment, and you're right, it does. This is an effective tool. It's something people have heard of. They maybe don't fully understand it, but if we were looking for just a simple definition, a garnishment is a legal process to obtain money that is owed by some third party to the judgment debtor. So, again, if you had a judgment against me, you would be looking for who owes me money, who owes Jim money that I can go garnish. And so, the typical example is garnishing bank accounts at a financial institution. I take and put $1,000 at the bank. That bank is now holding my money. It's owed to me by the bank. And so you could garnish ABC Bank and get that $1,000. That's an example of a garnishment. So, the most common is garnishing bank accounts. You can also, in some states, garnish wages. So if you find out where I work, you could garnish my wages. And, it's like child support garnishments are quite common. People don't pay child support. Their wages can be garnished for child support. Well, in some states, you can garnish wages for outstanding judgments.
Yeah, that's the only case that I've ever heard of is garnishing wages through you get your paycheck, it's a little bit out every month. I know several people that have gone through divorces who, unfortunately, that's the only way they could collect their child support. And it takes a long time to get that set up, from what I've heard. So, I mean, how long does it typically take?
For a garnishment, well, it's gonna vary from state to state, and it'll even vary within the courts. The process in Florida is a more drawn out process than the process in Georgia. In Florida, from start to finish, pursuing a wage garnishment, you're typically talking about a minimum of 3 months. In a lot of cases, it's going to be longer than that. In Georgia, the process is a little bit quicker, but there's all sorts of steps that have to be taken, and things can go wrong in the process. So it's not something that happens automatically. That is for sure.
Well, I mean, it's too bad because usually to even get a judgment, it probably takes a while because you're waiting for court dates and you're trying to gather information and see what you have to do to get to that point. So, I mean, this whole thing could take so long to get money that you're owed. Now let's talk about a levy, which is even scarier than a garnishment, or maybe just as scary. It depends on what it is, I suppose. But I'll let you give the definition.
Yeah, so a levy, the other common process for collecting a judgment, is where the sheriff takes possession of property owned by the judgment debtor and sells that property to satisfy the judgment. Typically, the property that's taken and sold in a levy would be like a motor vehicle, a boat, an RV, a motorcycle, something like that. But it can be any sorts of property. I've known of levies involving golf clubs or expensive jewelry or expensive electronic equipment. In the business world, it can be certain specialized equipment. I once was involved in a case where we levied medical equipment from a doctor who owed money. So we were levying x-ray machines and, those types of things. So, and again, the process does vary from, state to state.
Right. And so that was going to be my next question. Can you talk about the process to collect or enforce a judgment and how it does vary from state to state? I know, for example, that you work in Florida and Georgia, and you're always talking about the differences between those laws.
Yeah. So, each state has its own processes on how you can go about enforcing or collecting a judgment. And so those processes will vary from state to state. But then on top of that, which this is probably the bigger difference and the more important difference is, in each state there are what are called exemptions that are given to debtors, given to people who owe money, that protect them from certain assets or income streams being taken. And those can vary greatly from state to state. So, for example, Florida is known often as a debtor's haven or heaven. And a lot of times people who are sophisticated and owe large sums of money will come to Florida to try to protect their assets. And one of the things that is unique about Florida is we have a very liberal or generous, depending on which way you look at it, homestead exemption. So in Florida, a person's home, their primary residence, is exempt up to, it's based upon the size, the acreage. It's not based upon a dollar amount. Most states, there's a dollar amount. So in Georgia, your homestead exemption is a dollar amount. It's a weird number, and I should know it in front of me, but it's roughly $20,000. It's not exactly 20, but roughly $20,000. In Florida, the homestead exemption is a half an acre if you're within city limits. So if you're within a city, if you're in an incorporated area of the county, then you are exempt up to a half an acre. So if your home is a half an acre or less, it doesn't matter whether your home is worth 20,000 or 20 million, it's exempt. If you live outside the city, it's 160 acres. So this is why, for example, O.J. Simpson moved to Florida and bought a large home after the judgment was entered against him in California for the wrongful death case. It was to avoid having to pay that judgment. So he invested all his money in a large property in Florida. So most states don't have that. And so, collecting in Georgia is going to be easier if a person owns a home than collecting in Florida, as just an example. And of course, there's many other exemptions that vary from state to state that impact when and what you can go after. So it can vary greatly from state to state on how you go about collecting those judgments based upon the exemptions that are available.
Well, the last thing you want to be doing is sitting out on a curb. I know here in Massachusetts, we have a homestead as well. And you have to file for it. Like I didn't realize when I had to refinance to put this solely in my name. And apparently the mortgage company didn't renew my homestead. And so for all the viewers out there, make sure that if it's available to you, make sure that you have it and put it in place.
Yep. And in that process, again, varies from state to state on how that works too.
So do these judgments last forever, or is there an expiration date as to how long you have to collect that money?
It's my understanding that in all states, the judgments will expire at some point. I'm not familiar with all 50 states' laws, but I know in Florida and Georgia, and I've looked at it in a couple other states, they all have expiration dates. And as you would know, those expiration dates or deadlines are not the same. So in Florida, a judgment is valid for 20 years, but in Georgia, a judgment is only valid for 7 years. So, significant difference between Georgia and Florida.
So Georgia's 7 years?
7 years, and Florida's 20 years, so almost 3 times as long.
Wow, that's amazing. I don't know what it is about Florida, but you guys have the nice weather and the good laws. So how do you work with your clients related to judgments? Because you work with all credit unions, and I imagine that these laws that are great at protecting the citizens are not always the best for the banks and the credit unions. So what do you do?
Besides working with our clients to help them collect on their judgments, which, a lot of lawyers do that sort of work. What we bring to the table and what is unique is we work with our clients to help them devise procedures, processes, game plans to maximize the recovery of judgments obtained. So, for example, as I indicated, Florida, your judgments are good for 20 years. So, that can be a long process sometimes to collect a judgment. You could get a judgment now, and right now the person is unemployed. The person doesn't have a lot of assets or anything to go after. And so, that judgment can be put aside. And what happens a lot of times is those judgments are put aside and they're forgotten. And there is no process to go back and look at them again and work them again. And so one of the things we try to work with our clients on is setting up a process so that those judgments don't just get forgotten, that they are worked, because there was an investment made to get the judgment. So you want to make sure you're working it. So while in year 1, John Doe may not have any assets or may be unemployed, in year 4 or year 5 or year 7 or whatever, now John Doe's in a position to pay that judgment. And so, having a process in place to be able to track your judgments, be able to work your judgments, and do it in a way that is efficient and makes sense and is orderly is very important. So that's one of the things we work with our clients on. It's not just handling the legal work, but helping them in the processes and procedures to be effective and on their end of the process.
Well, have you heard that expression, the fortune's in the follow-up?
Yes.
It sounds like it really does. It sounds like it goes with this particular situation. And you're right, it's expensive and time consuming for you and your attorney if you're using one. So if you don't have a staff that understands it and goes back and helps recheck and see if you can get that money back, then it makes a huge difference in your bottom line to be able to collect on these judgments.
Yes, it does. And to credit unions, it can be a good source of income, because, these judgments represent debts that have been charged off, written off as uncollectible. So when they collect that money, that becomes income on the back end. And having a good process in place that helps them to effectively work these judgments can be crucial. And so, again, training your staff, having the right processes in place, the right procedures in place is critical, and certainly something I enjoy working with our clients on.
And that's amazing. Even if a regular person just looked through their bills on a regular basis, they could find lots of money. This is just like on a huge scale for the credit unions to have someone that knows. Yeah, yep. Exactly. So, well, this is all great information. And I think for the credit unions watching right now, it's just invaluable. And I know that you are invaluable to your clients. So I hope that everyone out there, if you're looking for an attorney to help out with any processes that might be askew within your business, absolutely talk to Jim Sorenson over here at Sorenson Van Leuven, or any one of their teams. They're all very talented and intelligent and up to date on all the newest laws and strategies to help you make the most of your business and be successful. And I hear that time after time in those testimonials from your clients about how they really rely on you to help keep their processes in place that keep them successful. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jim. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Erica. I appreciate being on the show today and talking about judgments today.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for everyone out there that's watching. We'll look forward to seeing you again real soon.